Welcome to The Explainer. Let's jump right in. What if everything we've been taught about capitalism is actually missing the biggest part of the picture? Today, we're diving into a radically expanded conception of our modern world, brought forward by political philosopher Nancy Fraser in her book, Cannibal Capitalism. Her main argument? That capitalism is fundamentally self-devouring. It's systematically eating away at the very foundations it absolutely needs to survive. We're going to deconstruct exactly how this works and why Fraser believes we need to completely rethink what capitalism actually is, moving away from just seeing it as an economy and instead understanding it as a massive, institutionalized societal order. Okay, so let's look at how we actually define the system itself. The standard textbook definition paints capitalism as an economic system, private property, market exchange, wage labor. But Fraser argues this is dangerously narrow. Instead, she radically redefines capitalism as an institutionalized societal order. Basically, it isn't just an economy, it's an entire social architecture. And this architecture empowers a profit-driven foreground to literally prey on its non-economic background supports. So, the really crucial takeaway here is that capitalism isn't just about what happens on the factory floor or on Wall Street, it's about the massive hidden structures that make those places possible in the first place. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking beyond economics. Uncover the four pillars holding the system up. Examine the XX nexus. Observe how the system devours its foundations. And finally, wrap up with critiques and transformation.
Section 1. Beyond the economic system. The foreground and the background.
Fraser posits that capitalism is built on this stark institutional separation. Think of it like a giant iceberg. In the foreground, right there above the water, we have official economic production. This is the monetized, value-creating activity that actually shows up on corporate balance sheets. But this front story completely disavows its dependencies on the background lurking beneath the surface. This background is made up of societal conditions that are largely unpaid or kept artificially incredibly cheap. They're categorized as non-economic, but they are the absolute essential foundation for the foreground to exist at all. Without that backstory, the front story just immediately collapses. Section 2. The four hidden pillars. Capitalism's background conditions. So, what actually are these hidden non-economic foundations? Fraser breaks them down into four pillars. First up is ecology, treating non-human nature as an infinite, totally free tap for raw materials and a bottomless sink for waste. Second is social reproduction. This is the often gendered, unwaged, or massively underwaged care work. We're talking raising children, maintaining households, building communities, the stuff that literally produces the human beings who then go to work. Third is political power. The state infrastructures, legal orders, and crisis management tools that secure property and global trade. And fourth is expropriation, the ongoing confiscation of wealth, land, and capacities, historically and presently tied to racialized and imperialist subjugation. All four of these pillars are structurally necessary for the official economy to function. And right here is the core dilemma. The system absolutely relies on these four pillars, but because it categorizes them as non-economic, capital treats them like an infinite trove of free treasure. It simply refuses to pay for their replenishment. And this is exactly what sets up the cannibalistic metaphor that's central to Fraser's whole thesis. By prioritizing endless accumulation, this institutionalized, socialized order acts like a snake eating its own tail. It systematically devours its own life force. Whether that means burning through ecological boundaries, totally exhausting caregivers, hollowing out state capacities, or bleeding subjugated populations dry. Section 3. The XX nexus. How the system siphons wealth. To explain exactly how this structural wealth transfer happens, Fraser introduces a concept she calls the X/X nexus. This highlights the relationship between exploitation and expropriation. Exploitation is our front story, right? It's the free wage laborers who are citizens, protected by the state, freely selling their labor. But this profitable exploitation structurally relies on expropriation happening in the backstory. This is the brute confiscation of land, resources, and capacities from dependent, unfree subjects who are denied any political protection. The raw mathematical reality here is that the profitable exploitation of the traditional worker is entirely dependent on the uncompensated expropriation of others. Now, it's really vital to point out that Fraser argues this is not just a thing of the past. We're not just talking about historical, primitive accumulation that kickstarted capitalism centuries ago. No, the XX nexus is an ongoing, built-in, structural requirement for the institutionalized societal order to function today. The system continually needs fresh infusions of stolen wealth, cheap nature, and unprotected labor to offset the costs of the official economy.
Section 4. Devouring the foundations, the systemic crises.
So what happens in the real world when an institutionalized order operates like this? Well, the result is overlapping systemic crises. The drive for endless accumulation jeopardizes the exact conditions required for our survival. We see this in our own lives, right? In overflowing carbon sinks and mounting climate anxiety. In the chronic burnout of undervalued care workers leading to real social fracturing. We see it in the erosion of state power, where global debt literally disables a government's ability to manage a crisis. And of course, we see it in ongoing environmental load displacement, where pollution and extraction are continually pushed onto racialized and marginalized communities. To ground this really expansive sociological theory, let's look at a highly tangible example drawn from the research, the artisanal cobalt mining sector in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This is a perfect modern encapsulation of cannibal capitalism in action. So the massive global demand for electric vehicle batteries, which ironically is a green technology meant to save the ecology pillar, is what's driving this extraction. The wealth is completely siphoned off to the global core at the severe expense of local laborers and the local ecology in the DRC. It represents the ultimate commodification of human and natural resources. It is the XX nexus functioning in real time, extracting massive value for the foreground economy while utterly devastating the background societal and environmental conditions of these local communities.
Section 5. Critiques and Transformative Justice.
As with any sweeping theory, this framework has definitely generated intense academic debate. So let's impartially explore how scholars are responding. Philosopher Stefano Petrucciani questions whether expropriation is truly a structural necessity for capitalism in principle, or if it's just a characteristic of how capitalism has historically unfolded. Meanwhile, a review in the radical journal Antipode critiques Fraser from a slightly different angle. They argue she actually downplays the ongoing necessity of settler colonialism, and they point out her tendency to caricature alternative movements like degrowth. Plus, some critics suggest her expanded view might still be missing pillars, specifically pointing out that consumerist ideology, which is a massive cultural condition for capitalism, is largely ignored in her four-pillar model. Despite those critiques, Fraser's diagnosis leads her to a really bold proposition for transformation. She argues that we must entirely deinstitutionalize the growth imperative. She calls for transformative justice and a process of redomaining, moving away from punitive social control and instead empowering local agency. Her vision of an alternative society is one whose ultimate aim is to replenish, repair, or replace all the wealth it uses up in production and reproduction. The idea is that instead of devouring its foundations, the system must be completely redesigned to actively restore them. By redefining capitalism not just as a market economy, but as this expansive, institutionalized societal order, we are absolutely forced to look at the hidden costs of our global structure. And the question we are left with is this: can an institutionalized societal order truly be reformed to replenish what it consumes, to repair the pillars of nature, care, politics, and equality? Or is a system built on endless accumulation ultimately destined to devour itself?